Hello, everyone. This is Belinda Carr. Welcome back to the Movers and Breakers podcast, where we dive into the world of construction and explore the stories of people and companies who are shaping the future of our industry. From the latest innovations to the challenges and triumphs of everyday professionals, we bring you the inside scoop of what's happening in construction. Today, I'm speaking with Lucas Carstens, founder and CEO of Modulize in Norway. Thanks for joining us, Lucas.
Thanks for having me.
So, I'm interested in diving into your background and your journey to construction technology. But before that, I want to say that you're the first person I've met who has a PhD in artificial intelligence. I thought that was super cool.
Thanks.
Has that always been a passion of yours? Is that something you wanted to pursue from a really young age?
No, so for me, I think as with quite a few other things in my career, it was kind of more of a case of sliding into things. So initially when I was leaving school and I got into, okay, what am I going to study? For a little while, I thought I was going to study psychology. I wasn't quite good enough at school to get into that. But I ended up doing a degree in cognitive science at the time, which was kind of a mix of what I thought I was going to like, but then also had this aspect of human-computer interaction, getting in touch with programming and getting to see some aspects in and around that. And I thought it was really cool. And one of the things that I then was really interested in was language. And I realized, okay, there's actually this thing called natural language processing, and that's computer science plus language. And it has this like cognitive aspect as well. So that was kind of what then led me to go into computer science. I ended up doing my master's in computer science in London, after initially studying in Germany, where I'm from, and then spent a year as a consultant, as a tech consultant. I was like, this is not really it either. But I had a really good relationship with the people at the university, and I was like, okay, why not try and do a PhD and spend a little bit more time just diving really deep into something that I knew I found fascinating. And then I think it was a really, really cool experience, but I ended up coming out of it, okay, this was great, but then I want to apply that somewhere outside of academia as well. And then I kind of went from there. So I know I didn't have this grand scheme of getting into this or that. It was just like, it was a great opportunity for me at the time, and I really enjoyed it. So I recommend it to people if they have an inkling that things like research and like figuring something very specific out to a very deep level is for them, then it's a really cool experience.
So your journey in life has been, you grew up in Germany, like you said.
That's right,
moved to London for your studies. And then how did you end up in Norway?
So I ended up staying in London a lot longer than I had anticipated. So I was there for 1 year, I thought, did my master's. It ended up being 9 years instead. Oh. So I kind of stuck around for the next thing. And at some point during that time, I met my now wife, who is Norwegian. And so it's a very common story when you get to Norway. I feel like there's a lot of foreigners that somehow ended up here because of a partner, and I'm one of them. And it's a pretty good place to end up in. So I moved here now 3 years ago. And I've been in Oslo those whole 3 years, but that was really the main driver at the end of the day, being ready for something new and something different, and then having that connection to Norway. And so far, that's been a pretty good choice.
No, so how did you get into the construction technology space? Because you talked about being interested in a language that got you into AI. And then I believe you worked at routers as well, Thomson Routers?
Yeah, Thomson Reuters, that's right.
Reuters, sorry. So what interested you about the construction industry, and that sparked a light in you or a flame in you and said that this is the next step. This is what I want to explore next.
Yeah. So there was one, I guess, in between step for me, which was I spent a couple of years working for a private foundation in London as well before moving here to Oslo. And there my role was kind of being the technologist in the room, for lack of a better word, and working with various program managers. So that were working on these projects around climate change, child health, so really, really cool projects. And so what I learned was that for me, it wasn't so much, I want to work with this technology or that technology. It was just the broader theme of technology having the potential for positive impact. And that, I think, then through a couple of twists and turns, I somehow ended up with, together with my two co-founders, looking at broadly the problem of construction waste. And I just thought it was a fascinating topic. And at that time, being very much the layperson and not knowing much about construction, it just seemed so strange to me that this industry produces so much waste, right? 40% of all waste come from the industry. And I was like, that's kind of crazy. And it also seemed kind of crazy to me that, again, as a layperson, there didn't seem to be this obvious solution to that problem, because in other spaces, I feel like we have obvious solutions for big problems often, even though they're very difficult to implement, right? Say, take the energy sector. I think for most people, it's, even if you're not deeply into the energy sector, relatively obvious that a transition to renewable energies, even though it's really hard to implement in a lot of ways, at least what we should be doing is kind of clear. And I didn't really see the same for this construction waste problem, even though I'm sure, as we'll talk about, there is a pretty obvious solution. But at the time, I was like, I don't know what's going on here. So I just thought it was really fascinating, this combination of a massive problem that impacts us all and the lack of an obvious solution, or so it seemed. And so then we just kind of ran with that and ended up trying to, and hopefully are on the path to trying to figure out what we can contribute to actually addressing that, and also now other challenges.
So it's pretty bold of you to identify this issue, but then say, I don't really want to go into a typical construction firm or an architecture firm or get into the AI side of it. Yeah. I'm going to create my own company with my other two co-founders and propose a new solution for the industry. That's a really bold move.
To be fair, though, I'm also wondering whether any architecture firm or contractor would have me at that point, right? Because there is, I think, this
resistance to change, I guess.
Yeah, when you build a company and you try to build a startup, part of it is having some non-conformist idea about something, and then oftentimes you end up being wrong, and other times you end up being right, or you could be somewhere in between. But I think just the opportunity to build something from scratch is really cool as well. So I think it's not so much, I think, at least in my case, the as particular boldness as it is, and it's one, I think, if not the best possible path for me to make a contribution in this space, where I can hopefully, together with my co-founders, take learnings from other experiences, be cognizant of the realities of construction or learn about it, but then also say, okay, maybe there are some opportunities to try something here, and doing that in the context of building a company. I think it's just, if it succeeds, it's the most rewarding thing that you can do, right?
That's true. So we've talked about how you started the company, and the company, like we mentioned earlier, is Modulize. And as the name suggests, it's an offsite construction platform.
That's right, yeah.
So it's essentially a web-based software where, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you can turn any building design into modular parts so that it's more suitable for offsite construction.
So that is where we want to end up, right? So there is a lot of, as I'm sure most people listening will also know, there's so much complexity in any given construction value chain, right? So for us, we think this vision of having the ability to just take any design and turn it into something that is ready to be built offsite there's different ways of going about that. A lot of companies now looking at it from an angle of defining kits of parts, defining construction systems, and the like. And we think that is one of the more important and right ways of doing it. But there's also, I guess, a second way that we're proposing, which involves a couple of other steps that we need to do first, which is really figuring out more scalable ways of using offsite construction, using the existing infrastructure that is already there. So if you look at offsite construction as an industry, there are thousands and thousands of manufacturers producing building elements, modules, walls, floors, roofing, different materials. And those are already out there. There's literally thousands of them. But it's very difficult to basically find what we could think of as project manufacturer fit. So you look at a particular project and maybe you don't have the data or the insight to be able to optimize this for that particular construction system or kit of parts, but you say, I really want to use offsite construction here, but how?
Oh.
So the idea with Modulize is that before we can get to this optimization stage and do kind of the cool stuff, there are a couple of foundational elements that we think need to be in place. And one is to actually capture reality in some sense. So what we're doing is to basically build a SaaS-enabled procurement platform as a first step, where as a construction company, you can take a project and say, okay, I do want to use, or at least consider using offsite construction for this particular project. And there might be a subset of categories. So for example, you want to consider, it's a school, and you want to consider exterior wall elements and structural concrete elements that are prefabricated, so built offsite. But you don't maybe necessarily know who to tender with, where to go. So the idea with Modulize is that we will take the project and say, for this particular project, if you're going to consider wall elements, structural concrete elements, and maybe a couple of other categories, we can take that project and basically distribute it out to a network of manufacturers and figure out who's the best fit amongst those manufacturers for that particular project. And then also give the manufacturers the tools to actually come up with a consistent view of their pricing, their cost, what a bid is going to look like. Because that's the other thing that's really challenging today, is that as a construction company goes out into the market and says, hey, you 3 wall element manufacturers, please give me a quote, they run 3 separate processes and get back 3 different results that often aren't very comparable. And you go, I don't even know.
Pretty inefficient.
Yeah, I don't know, like this is apples to oranges basically.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether the cheaper one is actually the cheaper one in terms of the suppliers here. So what we're trying to do initially, and this is what we're working on, is to basically have this SaaS-enabled procurement platform that connects these 2 stakeholders, gives both of them the tools to have a very efficient tendering and also quantity takeoff calculation and the other and price estimation process. So kind of just consolidate that process, and for the construction company, turn it into a process that at least feels as if it was just one tendering process, not 3, 6, 10 different processes. Because that, without going into the direction of us defining our own kit of parts and saying this is how it needs to be built, that we think is the way of capturing reality and saying, okay, this is the space of what can be built based on the manufacturers that exist in the world. And then based on that platform and capturing those insights, we can then take that next step that you're also talking about, is saying, okay, actually, now we know what can be built by these manufacturers. Let's feed that back into the earlier process. And that's more of kind of the longer term vision for us, because as we're still pretty early stage, we're kind of in the step 1 or 2 of that playbook of actually getting there in the longer term.
It's pretty amazing to hear you explain all that, because I'm not sure if I'm right when I say this, but 2 years ago when you started the company, did you have this grand vision of being able to modularize any building? But it seems like there has been a really steep learning curve. You have a really good understanding of how the construction industry works and the procurement industry works, and you've had to restructure your ideas of what Modulize is because of the realities of construction?
In some ways, yes. I think there's a couple of things that we learned along the way that made us slightly adjust at least what we're doing.
Which is
exactly.
completely normal.
In startup lingo,
thing.
you would call it a pivot, right? And
yes.
we haven't actually had a major pivot. So we had some minor pivots in the sense of, especially what is the first tool that we need to build for manufacturers to make their life easier? Because the starting point for us was pretty early on that we thought, okay, we need to build something that's useful for the manufacturers. Then we can build the platform, and then we can go big in a few years' time.
Because I've talked to people around the world who have this grand vision of I'm going to modularize every single building and turn into offsite construction. It's so simple. That's the answer. Why isn't everyone doing it? But it's beautiful to see how you have appreciated how the industry works, how manufacturers, you've identified smaller problems within the industry in procurement and getting all these different bids and different options. And it's nice to see that you have evolved from that grand vision, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to tackle this one problem, educate the industry through my platform, and then proceed to the next step. Yeah, it's a much more
I guess it's
realistic vision.
I guess it's a classical getting punched in the face by something kind of experience, right? Where you have a grand idea that doesn't, and I think it's something that at least we, and I think a lot of people like know in theory, and then when you go through the experience of actually trying to make something come to life, I think then things become very different, right? Going from theory to practice, where the what we're building now, the context of it hasn't really changed. So we fundamentally believe offsite construction is and should be the construction paradigm of, say, the next century, because otherwise there's no other big solution that is likely to actually help us address all of these major challenges. And yet the reality of a lot of building projects makes it very difficult to use offsite construction, right? And so it's really a matter of also being an early stage company. We can't lock ourselves away and try to code up that big grand vision and then come back in 5 years and hope somebody uses it, right? So there need to be all of these in-between steps that also bring us all these learnings from in terms of actually building the company and building something useful. So I think
and getting feedback from customers and from people in the industry, because you said, what's the point of building a software that no one is going to use? That's not really useful to the industry.
No, exactly. And for us, like, a really interesting experience has been, and that's more, I think, specific to construction and how this industry works in terms of the level of digitalization. We, again, being kind of naive early on, we thought, okay, like IFC is a thing, right? So surely everybody uses that. And clearly that's not necessarily the case, especially in the stage of the project where we ended up building something, which is the kind of tendering and procurement stage that we're initially focused on, right? Because oftentimes it's just not worth the effort and the resources required to have a good BIM model, to have a good IFC file, right? Because to make sure that the quality is there, everything's right, it's very difficult compared to just going and working with the floor plan. So those are the kinds of things I think that were very good learnings, and I think we made them quickly and early enough so that we can really wriggle our way to solving a real problem. And that's kind of the stage that we're at now, where I think we've built a really good and really super useful tool for the manufacturers. And now we're in the kind of early innings of starting to build that platform, which in its own right, I think will be pretty transformative if we get it right, but it also sets us up for that next stage.
Yeah,
exactly.
So your platform is already operational. You have some people using it around Europe. What are the different stages in your platform? Like, do people upload a model? Is it then analyzed? Like, can you walk us through the stages?
Yeah. So the workflow is relatively simple, right? So you've got the two sides, the construction company, the general contractor, and the manufacturers. The construction company will basically start a tendering process through Modulize and say, for this particular project, I want bids for these parts of the building. So like we said earlier, that could be exterior walls and structural elements. And then that particular project / tender will be distributed out either to the whole network of manufacturers, or the contractor will say, okay, I only want like manufacturers in this geography, or only want this type of manufacturer, so that we can do some degree of like pre-selection filtering. And then those manufacturers will receive that tender with the specifications as to what's required. Then maybe that part of the project goes to the timber frame wall manufacturer, and that other part goes to the precast concrete manufacturer. They will then use Modulize to automatically do quantity takeoff. So to basically extract the amounts, the net area, gross area, all the details that are needed to come up with a price quote. We will then, if the tool is configured right in that way, then the takeoff calculations will then also be translated into a cost estimate and a set of materials. And that then gets put into the bid itself. That is set to a standard format, so that if 3 different manufacturers go through the process of these calculations, the output will have different numbers, but it will have the same format. And then the consolidated view of those different bids across the types of manufacturers then goes back to the contractor. They will then hopefully pick one of those manufacturers, and that is where currently the workflow ends.
Okay.
So it's really that stage of identifying so developing the calculations and coming up with the quotes, with the bids, and selecting the right manufacturer for that project.
Okay.
And then going forward for us, it's all about figuring out, okay, which direction do we expand further into? But that's where we're at today.
But that depends on the feedback, depends on where you see growth, what your clients are demanding. That will change how you pivot to the next part of Modulize part 3 or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. So it's all about collecting as much feedback and input as possible, and then coming out, or I guess being as clever as possible about what we do with that.
Yeah.
Because I guess what we don't want to do is run around and implement every piece of feedback every time something comes through the door, but we rather want to try and be, I guess, a little bit smarter about it, where we want to have a broad view of similar but different enough types of stakeholders so that we can try and identify themes that are problems that are true for more than one stakeholder or more than one type of user or more than one type of manufacturer. Because what we don't want to do as a startup trying to build a product is to effectively become a consultant to a company and like building a solution that works for them, but then it doesn't work for anybody else.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of constant dance of trying to collect as much feedback as possible, and then actually knowing which parts of the feedback to take on board, and then also in which order to focus on them, because we're a small team, so we also can't do everything.
So you started your company in 2020, which was a very challenging time for all of us. But was it easier or difficult, or more difficult to grow Modulize in Norway during that time period? Was there a lot of support from the Norwegian government and from other people in our industry?
Yeah, so I want to say it was both, because on the one hand, we, on a personal but also on a professional level, kind of struggled with the same things everybody else was struggling with, right? So there was nothing unique about Norway in that sense. We had lockdowns, we had, everything that was kind of terrible about COVID.
Yes.
That was all true here as well. You see, I think more or less compared to other countries. But I think what was kind of great was that within all of that less than ideal context, there was a couple of really kind of positive aspects that really helped us early on in the very early days, where one, because of COVID and because of lockdowns, everybody had gotten so used to being online that these manufacturers that we were trying to reach initially, we could actually reach them without having to drive all over Norway, which is what we would have done pre-COVID. Because so in Northern Europe, particularly, a lot of the offsite manufacturers work with timber, so producing walls and the like made out of timber. So they will typically have their factories in the forests, by rivers, but not by the cities. So we're based in Oslo. So pre-COVID, we would have been driving all over the country trying to meet with these manufacturers, because they wouldn't necessarily be that keen to hang out on Zoom or Teams or whatever. And that obviously changed during COVID. So that was super helpful, actually.
It's like overnight, everyone was accepting of virtual calls.
Exactly. So it wasn't these, like, we weren't this weird group of random people reaching out and suggesting this strange way of meeting. It was okay, of course, we'll meet on Teams. Like, what else would we do? So it's
funny that way, isn't it? Like we just adapted to this new reality so quickly.
Yeah, we did. And I hated it, but it was very good, right?
Yeah.
In that sense. So it was super helpful. And then the other thing that was helpful for us as well was actually that the Norwegian government, to have a set of grant schemes for early stage startup, but also for SMEs, later stage companies, so on and so forth. They increased the sizes of the grants during COVID for various grant types. So we ended up getting a slightly larger grant from the government, which was not non-dilutive funding than we would have gotten pre-COVID. So within all of the bad stuff that came with COVID, there was a couple of nice, more or less meaningful benefits that we managed to
Yeah.
actually gather from that. And we were also super lucky in a way because there was this window in summer 2020 when we were kind of figuring out what we were going to do there, where there weren't any lockdowns in Norway. So
Oh,
actually,
okay.
that was very lucky in terms of the timing that we actually got to have a meaningful period during the summer where there weren't any major lockdowns, so we could actually like hang out and spend time together
Face to
physically,
face,
which
yeah.
I think makes a huge difference.
Agreed. Yeah. So, over the last year, I've heard a lot of rumors about the VC world drying up, and it's been really difficult for many startups to gain funding and
Yeah.
get new people on board. Have you experienced the same in Norway?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a pretty global phenomenon,
Yeah.
right? So I don't think there is like one geography that is
Yeah.
insulated from
Yeah.
everything that's going on. So I think broadly things look kind of the same here, but starting from a different base, right? If you compare it to the US, valuations were already lower even during the boom times. So there was maybe less of a, or is less of a drop to be had. But I think broadly speaking, the macro trends are pretty similar. So where say same as in the US, the later stage companies are the ones that are the hardest hit because they're closer to the public markets, and then it kind of trickles down from there. And we, I guess, a year in to the correction, where we'll see where we end up. But I think with the early stage companies such as us, I guess also still like slightly later into Series A, there is still a lot of capital, I think, available. It's just that we as founders might have to swallow a couple of pills around valuation and the like. But I think overall, it's not yet having gone through a process in this environment. I think it's
It's
still,
not all
so
doom
there's
and gloom,
still,
like some
there
people
is,
say. There is
yeah,
hope.
so there is money available. I don't think it will be as pleasant to fundraise now as it was maybe a year ago. But I guess it all comes back to building something that is meaningful, important, but I think also is actually in the more traditional sense venture backable, right? So the
Yeah.
very high potential outcome, potentially with high risk, but the high reward being there, because I think that also, I guess, is one of the which will come with the lower amounts of capital, I guess, likely to be deployed, and the depression on the valuations and all these things that are happening. I think being a real venture case early on, and I
Yeah.
guess being potentially the winner in a space and not being the third or fourth or fifth in the category, which probably would have been fine a year ago. Now I think we'll need to
We're
make
going to
our
be more
case that we can
selective.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we as early stage companies need to make a much stronger case that we will actually win a
Be the
space,
best. Yeah.
and not that we will be one of the 5, 10 best solutions in that space, because because I guess conditions have changed.
We have talked about it seems like you've gone through such a steep learning curve over the last 2 years, and I've said this already, but
Yeah.
you've tackled learning how the construction industry works and
Yeah.
getting to know all these suppliers, getting to know what your client wants, and at the same time fundraising and everything that comes along with building this company. Do you think that deciding to start Modulize with two other partners has been an excellent decision for you because y'all can maybe share this workload and you all have specific skills that
Yeah.
like all of y'all are not working on the same task at once, y'all can delegate
Yeah.
work.
I think everyone's different. For me personally, I don't want to imagine doing this as an individual founder. I think part of that is being a first time founder.
Yeah.
So I think it's not just learning the industry, right? It's learning how to
How
build a
it-
company and
exactly.
everything that comes with that. So for me, I feel very fortunate to have two great co-founders. I think for the three of us, even with just removing one person, we wouldn't have the same, I think, quality also of the dynamic and the ability to cover so many different things. So for me, it's great. I think for other people, maybe it's better to be just two people. And then for yet another group of people, doing the solo founder route is probably the right choice. But I would imagine that with, at least in my situation, having these multiple learning curves to stack on top of each other, it's probably not such a bad idea to have co-founders.
Yeah. When you started Modulize in 2020, you were looking for something different, something exciting that would challenge you and help you explore this world
Yeah.
of AI that you were interested in. Has Modulize turned out to be what you hoped, or has it been a bit of a wake-up call that, okay, maybe this isn't really what I wanted, and I need to learn a different skill set, and it's
Yeah.
not what I used at what you used at
Yeah.
a different company?
I mean, I definitely have to learn a ton of different skill sets, but I think that's exactly what I'm looking for. I am personally, it's
Lifelong
one of
learner.
this.
That's what you
Yeah.
seem like.
So
Yeah.
I know, I think for me, it's from a personality point of view, one of the things that I find scariest is being bored. So, and it happens very quickly. So I think with that type of predisposition, I guess being a founder is probably one of the best things I could have done, because I am definitely not bored, and I don't think I will be anytime soon. And the other thing for me, I've never had this feeling of falling in love with a particular technology. I think language is fascinating. I think natural language processing is fascinating. I think AI is, and all the different kind of topics that we talk about so much now. But it's I find the ability to like do something with that much more exciting than the technology as a means to
Itself.
an end, as just the end. It's the means to an end, right? It's
Yeah.
not the end in itself for me. So for me, getting to build a tech company in a space that I think is just so fundamentally important to all of us. We all live somewhere, work
Yeah.
somewhere. It impacts our environment. It impacts everything. I think that is much cooler than getting to say, okay, I work with AI or I work with this or that technology. So, and I think that's been like that for me the whole time. So, and with that, I think doing this is a pretty good choice, and I'm very happy. I can't say things go exactly as I expect, because there's a lot to learn and
Yeah.
there's a lot to just not foresee, but I think that's also exactly how I want it to be.
Yeah. Do you have a piece of advice for a young individual who's just as passionate as you are about artificial intelligence or automation in the construction industry? Because what y'all are building, like y'all are still y'all are a young company trying to figure out your niche in the industry. But the path that you're on has so much potential. There is
Yeah,
so much potential to automate the construction industry,
yeah,
whether it's
yeah,
offsite
totally.
construction, on-site construction. It's such a valuable area, and y'all are tapping into that valuable area and trying to find your niche. But is there one piece of advice you would have for a young individual straight out of college or something that's interested in the space that you're in right now?
Yeah, yeah. I guess for me, maybe it would be, and it's also because it is kind of personally driven, but I do think it's important to not just fall in love with the technology,
Yeah.
and then try to like retrofit that onto something, because I really want to work with the like OpenAI API, and I'm going to try and like figure out how to do that. I think especially in an industry like construction, where you then do that and you do get punched in the face, because the basics maybe aren't as you would expect, and you don't need the most sophisticated technology. You just need to solve a problem. And I think if you can find a problem that you really passionately care about, and then you can be a little bit more agnostic to how you solve that problem, what's the technology stack, I think that would be my advice, to maybe go that route, because I do think it's more likely that you end up somewhere where you make a real impact. And I think, at least to me, that is maybe more exciting than getting to work with a particular technology.
I love that. I love that realistic approach. It's it's not like saying, "Hey, I love a Boston Dynamics robot, and I'm going to figure out how that robot can work on a construction
Yeah.
site to transport
No,
tools."
exactly.
No, you've
Exactly.
said no. Identify a problem talk to the people in the industry, and then figure out your place in it. And that is such good advice for everyone in the industry looking to innovate. Thank you, Lucas, for sharing all this information about Modulize and sharing your knowledge. I'm looking forward to seeing how Modulize evolves in the next few years and seeing what the next version of Modulize and how it helps our industry. If people want to learn more about the company, what's the best way to reach out to you? Maybe go to your website or some social media pages?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so you can find us on modulize.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to me, lucas@modulize.com. So pretty straightforward. And yeah, I think those are probably the easiest ways to reach out, learn more. And yeah, for anybody in construction or interested in construction, we'd love to chat, love to learn more, and also love to share our passion for offsite construction. So definitely keen to hear from anybody who wants to chat more about that.
Thank you once again, Lucas. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.